Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a Lunch and Learn session as we take this opportunity to learn about all the important resources that are available to you as a member of the Down Syndrome Association. So today we welcome Sandy Kaiser, Employment First Specialist with the Missouri Department of Mental Health, also referred to as DMH. DMH is the gateway to many services and funding resources, including the Down Syndrome Association. In fact, we recommend our members connect with DMH as this helps us to continue to keep our programs low or no cost. Sandy will explain the benefits and resources of the Department of Mental Health and the importance of connecting with them early. Sandy, I will pass it off to you and we can get started.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. Just giving a little bit of background so you know who I am and what I bring. So yes, I work for DMH, the division of DD. I started out in support coordination in the St. Charles area back in 2004. So I've been with the state about 21 years now. Prior to me starting with the state, my expertise, my experience was all in working with very young children, so that preschool age. So that was kind of my background. I had worked since 1990 with kids with disabilities, and mostly those very young kids. So then when I started at DMH, it was kind of interesting because the day I started, they're like, well, yeah, we still have a need for somebody to work with school age, but we also have this really high need for somebody to work with adults, young adults. So what if we made your caseload kind of a hodgepodge of high school students and those young adults, those 20 to 30-year-olds, just kind of coming out of school and stuff like that. So this really wasn't the population I had the most experience with, but I was like, sure, why not? Let's go for it. And I'm glad I did that because it really allowed me to experience things from the family and the individual's perspective of getting out of high school, transitioning into adult services, and what families and individuals experience along the way, the frustrations, the good things, all of it. And it really allowed me to become very familiar with those resources as well, which really helped position me for the position I'm in now as the Employment First Specialist. So I took that position in 2012. And at that time, we had one of us in each of the regional offices. So we really were kind of that local resource for helping individuals and families and support coordinators and service providers kind of navigate, how do I do this? What are the resources here locally? And how can I get the employment supports I need? And, how do we have conversations about employment? All of that. So fast forward, the division has gone through some budget cuts over the years. So I am now the last man standing. So I cover the entire state of Missouri. Let's kind of get into this. So McKinney, you want to jump in there with why we are having this discussion today?
Sure, and thank you, Sandy, again for doing this for us. As many of you may have gotten a letter signed by our executive director asking you all to get into the process of becoming a part of the Department of Mental Health. We are doing that because, as you all know, or you may not know, is that we now get funding from our Senate bill for boards. One of them, for majority of you, would be the Productive Living Board, PLB. Some of you in St. Charles, that is DDRB. St. Louis is DDR. And folks in the county, anybody listen, DDA. And there are eligibility they put upon us so that we can continue to provide the services, as Linda said at the beginning, that are little to no charge. So it's very important. But as these letters go out, We do have families that are calling us back and asking why, what for, and all of that. So we've asked Sandy here to give us the, as they would say, the penny on all of it, so that we will all be better informed.
What I'm showing here on this slide, this is taken directly from our website, our dmh.mo.gov, the developmental disabilities. So there's that link that will take you directly to this page. And this just really talks about what is that eligibility. And as McKinney was explaining, you know, the Senate Bill 40 boards, they tend to use the same criteria that the division uses for establishing eligibility. And while some of the boards will accept other proof, so DDR and PLB, I think will accept, you know, the IEP, a letter from a doctor, otherwise to establish that proof of eligibility. Some of the Senate Bill 40 boards really like having that DMH number, because then they know it's not only a diagnosis, you're meeting functional limitations, all of that. So I think St. Charles County's DDRB and Jefferson County's developmental disability advocates, they like to have that DMH number. That really kind of puts it all in a nicely wrapped and packaged format for them. So there's no question. So now let's take a little deeper dive in what that eligibility looks like. Basically, it's that, you know, one, you have that developmental disability. And typically with developmental disabilities, we're looking at things like physical issues, which could be cerebral palsy, could be spina bifida, could be, you know, quadriplegia, spinal cord injuries, that kind of thing. So we're really looking at, like I said, physical, could be cognitive as well. So cognitive impairment, that's typically the biggest one, but there's others that could also affect the cognitive abilities too. Sensory issues, so we know that autism will manifest a lot of sensory issues, seizure disorders, those kind of things. So most of the developmental disabilities we're looking at that they've occurred prior to the age of 22. With cognitive impairment, that one we're looking at prior to the age of 18. So one thing is, do you have that label, that developmental disability? Then the next thing is kind of looking at that there's the disability is severe enough that it's causing issues, functional limitations. So that's kind of where you will see some of the things with the Missouri Adaptive Ability Scale. So used to be years ago, we would use the Vineland for kids and the MCABI, so the Missouri Critical Adaptive Behavior Inventory for adults. So we would use those two tools. Now instead of using the Vineland or the MCABI, we are using the MAS, the Missouri Adaptive Ability Scale, and that will assess those functional limitations. So you'll see, like, children from birth to 4, we're looking at 87% below average in one major life area on the MAS. For children 5 through 17, we're looking at least 95% below average in one major life area on the MAS. For adults 18 and older, now we're looking at 95% below average in 2 major life areas. So that's kind of looking at those functional limitations. And then that third piece is that there is kind of like a lifelong or a long-term need for that specialized coordination, that connection to resources. What happens when you meet that bare minimum criteria? So this is where the Senate Bill 40 boards come in, because they do have a lot of programs and services they fund for individuals that meet our criteria for eligibility. So that's where at the bare minimum, you're kind of getting that access to Senate Bill 40 board funded programs. Now in 2018, the division changed things so that individuals without Medicaid wouldn't necessarily be getting access to the support coordination. So that's the next level. So if you meet that criteria that on that previous slide that I had with our eligibility, and you've got Medicaid, now you can get assigned a support coordinator. And that support coordinator can help you navigate all the different resources out in the community and which ones do I need to tap into, when and where. If you don't have Medicaid, now you're kind of getting that information specialist or that information and referral resource. So on this screen, again, this was taken directly from DMH's website, and it shows the counties that provide that information and referral resource through their local targeted case management providers. So kind of focusing in on the St. Louis area, you'll kind of notice that St. Charles, St. Louis County, St. Louis City, and Jefferson County, they're all white. And what that basically means is if somebody meets our eligibility criteria, they have the developmental disability, they have the functional limitations, they have that need for, needing specialized coordination, but they don't yet have Medicaid, they're going to be kind of in this bucket where they can reach out and get referrals, information about resources when needed, but they're not necessarily going to have somebody assigned to them who will then meet with them on an annual basis, create a detailed plan, and then monitor the progress towards personal goals. So they're not going to have that. It's just going to be kind of like, yeah, you know our number, call us when you need us. And then they can also push out some information occasionally. So if they hear about something, they could just say, hey, just an FYI, here's some information you may or may not be interested in. But it's not going to be to the same level as you would get with support coordination. So now let's say you meet the eligibility criteria. You have Medicaid. So, and for support coordination, for adults, so I'll kind of start there. So with adults, if somebody has Medicaid under the adult expansion group, that qualifies them for that support coordination. So that will at least get them access to a support coordinator. Now, when we start looking at that top triangle, the waiver funded services, so there are some individuals that they're going to need funded supports more than what is available under SB 40 board funding or other community resources. They're needing kind of like those waiver funded supports. So to have that, an individual has to have Medicaid under Mo Health Net, aged, blind, and disabled, or a ticket to work health assurance for adults. There are other Medicaid categories for children that will also make you eligible for waiver funded supports if you're a child. So I want to say Mo Health Net for kids is one of them. Giving you some examples of the difference between waiver versus Senate Bill 40 board. So, and using employment, which is kind of my expertise. So on the left side, most of the Senate Bill 40 boards here in the St. Louis area will offer each of these. So they'll offer access to pre-employment or employment training programs. Benefits planning, so that very in-depth, detailed benefits planning is available in St. Charles and St. Louis counties. And then retention services. So this is kind of looking at somebody has gotten a job, they've had some intense job coaching, but now we are just doing kind of check-ins. We're doing minimal support to help that person maintain that job. Waiver funding, you can see we've got a little bit more specific services. We've got career planning, benefits planning, pre-vocational services, job development, and support employment. So going into a little bit more details of this. Career planning is that service that allows that individual to kind of take a more in-depth look at what are my vocational interests? What's my skill set? What are my needed conditions? And where in my community might all of those meet up for a kind of a potential job match? Benefits planning is really taking a closer look at what are my options with working and managing my needed benefits. If I rely on that Medicaid for my Medicaid waiver, I might be like, hey, how much can I work and it not affect my Medicaid eligibility? What do I need to know there? So a benefits planner will kind of take a close look at what type of benefits somebody relies on, be able to explain the different rules for those benefits, and then kind of go into details about what options the person can have, and then help them kind of create that detailed plan for moving forward. Here's how much I'm going to work and earn, and this is what kind of assistance I'm going to need to make sure that we keep things moving smoothly. Pre-vocational services is focusing on developing those universal workplace behaviors, skills that people need for any and all types of employment. So it's looking at, again, just those workplace behaviors such as communication, handling frustrations, independence, initiation, task focus, understanding quality of work. Job development is helping that person actually get that job. So it's going out and meeting with potential employers and making the case. Why would they want to hire this person? And then supported employment is that job coaching supports to help that person learn and maintain that job, and kind of developing those supports within the employer as well, so that we can maximize the person's independence in the job. Giving an example here, let's say we have a young lady named Jody. She is getting out of high school and she's interested in working. So she starts to look for work. She's able to initially get some help from Voc Rehab. So Voc Rehab does kind of that exploration piece to look at what her vocational interests are, and what kind of jobs in the community would match those interests and her skills. They do that, then they move on and they help her get that job and kind of get acclimated to that job. Maybe we are realizing, as the job coach has been working with Jody for a little while, that, she's going to need a little bit more supports than what is typically available under retention. I'm also going to step back here and say that while she was using VR, she was also able to tap into some of those other Senate Bill 40 board funded employment supports. Now that she's kind of in that job coaching, we've been working with her for a while, we're noticing that it's like, just that check-in piece that's funded by the Senate Bill 40 boards, not quite enough. Jody's going to need more regular hands-on assistance. So maybe she's going to need daily or weekly job coaching support. So we're thinking it's going to be more than what the Senate Bill 40 boards can cover. So that's where we may want to be like, okay, this is an example of where we're going to need to be looking towards waiver funding. Now let's talk about that waiver eligibility, because it is a little slightly different from just that basic eligibility for case management. There are still a lot of things that are very similar. We're still looking at, is this an intellectual or developmental disability? We're looking at, does the person have Medicaid? Now, like I said earlier, a person can qualify for case management services, having that Medicaid under the adult expansion group. Waiver, you got to have either Mo Health Net for aged, blind, and disabled, or you have to have that ticket to work health assurance. And that's for adults, basically saying that. Like I said, for kids, I think if you have the Mo Health Net for kids, you could still potentially qualify for Medicaid under that. When we're looking at meeting the intermediate care facility for individuals with intellectual disabilities level of care. So they define this as being below or 95% below average in at least 3 major life areas on the Missouri Adaptive Ability Scale. If you remember, just to be eligible for DMH, Senate Bill 40 board funding, case management services, you only had to have functional limitations in it at least 2 areas of major life activity. For adults, waiver funding, now it's 3. And I want to say that's the same for kids too. So if you think back with kids, they only had to have functional limitations in at least 1 major area of or major life activity. Under waiver, they too have to have functional limitations in 3 areas. And then we're looking at that they are going to be needing an ongoing service, at least 1 service that would be provided monthly. Now kind of talking about the intake process, if you haven't been through that. So this too is also taken directly from our website. So it basically kind of talks about what can you expect as a family member or an individual trying to navigate the DD system. So first it's going to start with contacting your local regional office. There is a QR code in the upper left-hand corner. Of course, if you're going through our website, you can also go directly to our website and you can look up the map and it will show you which regional offices serve which counties. So then you would contact that regional office that serves your county. Then you're going to be talking with an intake worker who is going to gather some information from you. They're going to look at, where do you live? What's the nature of your disability? Who would be able to provide information? All of that stuff. So they're going to get that information. Then they're going to complete the application and send that to you. So then there will be an application that you review, make sure it is complete and that it is correct. There's no errors. Then you would sign and return it. Then the next step would be, okay, now we need to do that assessment. We also need to gather those records. I will tell families that it can make the system or make things go a lot more quickly and seamlessly. If you already have those records, you can supply them directly to the regional office. It doesn't have to be us reaching out to doctors' offices and schools and trying to get those those documentation sources ourselves. Sometimes that can take a while, and sometimes that could cause things to get delayed. So if you guys have those documents already in your possession, that makes it go that much more quickly. Once we have records and that assessment has been completed, then that eligibility determination is made. Do you meet it? Yes, no, and they will let you know in writing and verbally. And then, of course, that last piece, referral. So if you're determined eligible, but you don't have Medicaid, then you'll be in information coordination or with the information specialist. If you have the Medicaid, then you might be assigned a support coordination. So, and depending on the county you live in, it might be you are directed to a targeted case management provider. And if you're determined ineligible, there will still be resources that are provided to you. One of the things that could potentially happen is, let's say you have a disability, but the disability is primarily one that we would consider more mental health, bipolar, anxiety, depression, ADHD kind of fall under that. So basically with one of those diagnoses, if that's the only disability that a person has, and there is no cognitive impairment or other developmental disability included in the documentation, then we might say, we can't help you, but behavioral health can. And here's where you can go to connect with those resources. Last slide here is my contact information. So you can always reach out to me if you have questions or if you're wondering, okay, how do I navigate this? What do I do?